Okay, great. So just a moment. Just keep it up. Okay. So I hope most of us here are either using Android phones or iPhones. So these are the two top players in the market right now. So which also means that we should be able to. This is the most apps that we get for testing, and this is where the world is heading towards. But right now, this particular session, I'm going to focus more on the Android. So next session, we'll talk about iOS and what can we do with it. So I hope everybody are also in front of the laptop, which means we're going to do some setup, download some tools, and get hands-on as much as possible. We are also going to find bugs. So the fact that Android behaves differently in different phones and different versions of Android, that's the reason people want to test on different devices and different OS versions so that they get maximum input on what they can fix, what can they optimize for their app to work successfully, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about basics of what exactly Android is all about. I have a small mind map that I could share, but then I'm going to jump right directly into the versions that exist in Android. So it starts from Android version 2.3.3, which is the API. So usually developers take the API levels. So they define a basic API levels, and then to the latest one, which is what we are seeing here, 28. So the Android 10 is about 29. So which has not got here distribution is because of the fact that not too many people have upgraded to Android version 10. So these are the Android versions. So you'll be testing mostly from 5 to 10, which is Android Pie. Then there is the latest one, Android 10. So they removed the code name in the latest Android version. So it is going to be called as Android 10 only. So you'll be starting from 5.0, which is where the most of the distribution is. If you look at the pie chart here, so these are the small ones: the gingerbread, the ice cream sandwich, and the jelly bean. Very, very smaller set of the Android usage, and most of the things are taken with the recent upgrades. So but the developers are by default going to define from API 19. So one thing that I'll also show you to check what is the basic um, API version they support, what is the min SDK, what is the max SDK that they support. So these are done by the developers to automatically add the specific libraries for different Android versions to work. So for example, the way it works is when people start to write a hello world application, all they do is to say, I want a min SDK version of 19. So, and then they don't define the end, for example. So they don't say that the last version we support is 28, but then it's 29. But the Android by default adds the necessary libraries for them to get started on the application. So which means they don't need to define which version they will be supporting, except the basic version they want to get started off with. So that's 21 or 19. So you can ask your developers, hey, what is the basic version that we support? And then you can also look into the analytics of saying which are the Android versions that's being used by our users, so which they can get it from Play Store, Play Console, which I'll also quickly give you an idea of how it looks, what developer sees, because that's the most important thing that will give us an idea of what versions of Androids to get more coverage of testing, right? So this is the basics of Android. So it starts from we call it the API level, although people go with the Android versions, but the API level is what will define what application will work on what version of the Android, right? So I'm going to keep this open in case of any questions. Okay, great. Moving ahead, so Android, I know you guys know that it's by Google. So Google launched this for 10 years before. If you see the version of the Android, which is Android 10, so it's been 10 years since they launched the application, launched the operating system. So they made it open source, which means anybody can take the source code of Android, modify them, and then relaunch it in the market. For example, the companies like Samsung, companies like LG, companies like Xiaomi, and all of these companies, what they do is they take the default Android, which is the pure version of Android, and then they modify, add layers on top of it. For example, Samsung has this Samsung Pay, and they have this skin on top of it, MIUI. All of these are based on Android. So that's why we call it based on Android. But then the version is MIUI because Xiaomi has taken the open source code and customized it to the need of what they want to. Since it's open source, nobody can question anybody of why are you basically modifying the source code and things like that. But the basics of the architecture remains the same, except the UI and the interaction of certain pieces of the architecture, which I'll also walk you through, guys. So then we have also the screen sizes and densities. The way we look at is these are the different screen resolutions. So for example, if you guys know the recent phones that are coming with quad HD display, if you guys know what quad HD is, there's the XHDPI. So what we call it is a different resolution of the pixelation. So the higher the resolution, the higher the quality of image that developers have to process on the screen, else it will look very blurry, right? So these are the different resolutions. But what Android has done is the fact that they have launched something called 9-patch images. What happens is that the moment you give a small image to the Android, which is if you're using Android Studio or something like that, it churns out different resolutions of images, and then it knows what images to use based on the kind of display that you're using. For example, I have a quad HD display, which I can show you. So this is basically a quad HD display. So yeah, so now everybody knows the password. But yeah, so this is a quad HD display, which means this particular resolution has a different way of rendering images. So if we are using, for example, that HDPI, we will see a lot of images and everything being blurry, and then the resolution also differs. So Android has this adoption of having to push whatever the images that are necessary for different screens. That's something that is by default. So where this will help us is the fact that if you extract an APK, so for example, I have an APK here. I'm going to quickly show you guys as well. So I have an APK. So I actually rename this to .zip. So you use .zip file. So it becomes a zip. Now I open it. So this is just like your okay. There's some problem with that. I need to use WinZip. Okay, so what happens is this is an APK. I converted them into a .zip format. So what it does is basically to give you access to the files inside an APK, and it also gives you a specific folder which shows resources and has all these things present there, which means a developer has to put all the resources, all the images in a resource file, and Android knows what images to take from what based on the kind of device that you're using. So this is on the front of the screen sizes and density. This also matters of how exactly the app is optimized to run on different screen resolutions. So if your app is not great in terms of the images that they're using, so if you install the same app in Samsung S20 Plus, for example, Samsung S20 has a very high display density. Everything starts to look very blurry, and this is something that we can do. So one of the things that we also have is the OpenGL. So this is graphic libraries that people are using. There are different companies using different graphic libraries. The latest one is what 3.2, which is what is on the latest versions of Android. This cannot be updated on the app front. This is updated on the OS level. So which means whatever comes with an Android as part of the Android system, for example, the Android Oreo or Lollipop and things like that. So the versions, the OpenGL version will change accordingly. So this is called OpenGL is because this particular graphic library is open source, which means anybody can use the graphic libraries to render something. If you the next architecture will help you guys to understand what exactly is the internal mechanism of how these things are interconnected to give you the experience that you are using the phone right now. So this is on the basics of how the Android is defined. So there are different uh, versions having different capabilities. The latest version has a much more um, smoother transitions. They use different kinds of runtime systems and things like that, which we'll see in the next architecture. So any questions here? If I don't get any answer, I'm going to move ahead. Okay, not a problem. Okay, so coming to the Android, the architecture. So you guys can type your questions if you can't ask it. If you can't actually get the mic off, so you can just type and send it. I can see the questions as well. So that's something that we can do. Just to give you an idea of the architecture, I'm sure most of you guys have actually gone through this architecture. If not, this is a good time for you guys to even understand what the architecture is all about and how it works and things like that. So Android is basically a Linux-based operating system. So where there are Linux kernel, and then there are hardware layer, and then there are native libraries, and then there are frameworks, and then there are apps. So if you see here, so there are Linux kernel, and we have HAL, and then we have libraries, then the Android runtime. So the API frameworks and the apps. So this is where we do the most of the work. So right now, these are the final output of every applications that we see on the phone. But to make some of this work, there are a lot of things that are happening in the background for you to get something on the front end. So let's say every click that we do is involved with certain part of the API framework, certain part of the library, certain part of the hardware layer, and then the drivers to give you something. So just to give a how exactly it works is, for example, in Windows, there's something called exe file, and then there is something called there is a file, that DLL file, which is where the main data is stored. That's called the basic code that will get executed. Similarly, we have APK that gets extracted, and then we have something called dex file, Dalvik executable file. So that is what contains the most of the code of the Android, and then it executes every time you do something on the phone. So most of the things happens here at the runtime. We have something called Android runtime art. So this is now the latest runtime mechanism. Before this, there was Java decompiler. So which means every time you do something, it decompiles, it recompiles, and executes a specific line of code. But then Android runtime, something called be ahead of time, where we say that every time you try to do something, the code is already decompiled, which means it has to only execute. That's why the recent Android versions are much more faster than the previous ones. So these are some changes that they have done in the past to overcome the performance issues, right? So let's talk about a little bit of the kernel. This is just like how your drivers are installed in your Windows. For example, we install if you connect a printer, we need to install a driver. So that driver basically interacts between the kernel and the application. Similarly, the drivers are part of the Android by default. So these are the drivers that we have, for example, the display driver, the Bluetooth driver, the keypad driver. All of these are predefined in the Android system for anybody to get in touch with. So that is something that is there as part of the kernel. And these are very well optimized, and these doesn't change over time as far as you update your hardware or the software over the next Android version. So there is always an upgrade that comes in. So some of the drivers get updated over the Android version that comes in. And there we have the HAL, which is the hardware abstraction layer. This is where all the hardware is initialized with respect to talking to the drivers. So whenever we launch a camera, for example, camera needs multiple things. For example, it needs a hardware to be connected. It needs a driver to be connected. It needs the graphic system to be connected. It requires the software to run. So these are the 4 different things that happens every time you launch a camera. So now there is a viewer which is connected to the Android, which is connected to the camera sensor, and then there's a camera driver that connects these three pieces. So every time we launch a camera, all these are working in a harmony to give you that particular experience of having to capture a picture. So everything is done on the go, on the fly. Every time you click a picture, every time you launch an application. So these are interconnected to give you that necessary experience that you're looking at. So these are again as a driver. So if you want, anybody can access the camera, anybody can access the Bluetooth. For example, every time we install an application and launch, there is an option that asks you for permission to use Bluetooth driver. If it asks a permission for you to use as a camera. So all of this is because everything is like a Lego system, and then you can use each one of them individually to call specific things. And if you deny that permission, you don't get access to the camera. So the fact that everything is individually maintained, so each of them can be called differently. So then we have the libraries. This is where most of the things are processed. For example, every time you launch a Chrome, you guys know there is Safari. Safari is there is a WebKit. The WebKit is open source that was made by Apple, and the Chrome and Chromium and everything is built on top of this WebKit. So Google has it by default in their Android systems. So if you want to build a simple app, right, so you just have to call this particular WebKit API, and then you have all the access. So you don't have to do anything on your own. So these are something that are already there for you to get access to. And there is a lot more things. For example, the graphics, and then OpenGL, and then media framework. For example, if you have to play, nowadays, if you see the phones are into 16:9 ratio, which means it's very lengthier than what the actual ratio of the video is, which means you can pinch in to get you that particular screen width. So this is done by the media framework itself. So it knows that there is an extra space available on the screen for me to expand it, and then you can use that specific API and libraries. It is automatically picked as soon as you call a specific API. There is no need for the developer to define unless he wants a specific action to be done. All of these things are by default provided to the Android app developers. And then we have the API framework. And then this is where on the higher level, whatever happens, for example, if you install an application, if you are getting whatever the services that are being done by the application, you get a notification, you get an SMS, you get an alert, there is always on display, and then the timing, the alarm, everything comes from here only. So this is on top of, imagine it like a dairy milk, right? It's a chocolate. There's a chocolate, and there are nuts, and on top of that there is a foil, and then there is a cover to it, and there is printing. So this is something very similar to that. So it's as a whole, we are getting a chocolate, but then all these are working together to be able to make things work. So we have a question, I think so. Noise in the background. Yeah, that's because I think the power just went. It's off now. Okay, great. Okay, so so this on the platform architecture. If you guys have any doubt, so this on the higher level, there's a lot more details, but this is very important for us to understand because of the fact that every time we start running the tests, right, we start testing the application. So we need to know why this works in a specific way. So for you guys to give an idea is when I was testing an application in a hackathon, right? So this app requires a photo, which is the camera access. So most of the cameras now comes with two lenses, which is a primary lens and there is a secondary lens. So the APIs are defined in such a way that you can either use the primary lens or the secondary lens to capture a video or a photo. Now, what happens during a development is that you just request for a camera API. The developers, they just request for a camera API and then they just leave it. But what happens is you are basically using the primary lens by default and not making use of any of the features that is there as part of your secondary lens. For example, the wide angle or zoom lens or any of that sort. I know everybody here are using Instagram. If you guys know that the Instagram picture quality, when you capture through the Instagram, is much more less than you're capturing directly through a camera, which is your default camera, and upload it on Instagram. It makes a lot of differences because the API that you are using as part of the Instagram is they have built their own camera capability instead of using the API, which means they don't use the complete potential of the hardware and the software of the default camera system that comes in. This is because of the fact that they want to take control of how the pictures are optimized, and how can they give a better storage, and how can they push it to the server and things like that. This is how their tech stack works. But then Instagram is one good example, and the same with the WhatsApp and other. WhatsApp uses the default API, which means it's much more better quality than the ones that is inbuilt. But then so these are the different things that the different examples of how the developers can make use of different APIs to be able to extract maximum experience out of the Android. So this on the architecture front. So there are a lot more details that you guys can check out how it is working. But then I'll quickly jump into the next things of how we can get started off and what are the tools that I generally use for testing. Yes, Chidambaram raised his hand. Yeah, go ahead, Chidambaram.
Hey, Abhi, I just have a quick question about that the camera bit that you mentioned right in the beginning.
Yeah.
That you had, there are 4 components that come together to work, right? One was the viewer, the other one was the driver. But what I kind of missed them.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, one you mentioned about you gave an example about how different components come together to get the camera working and help us take an image, right?
Yes.
So one was the viewer, which will talk to the sensor, I believe you said, the camera sensor.
Yeah.
One was the driver.
Yeah.
What were the other 2?
So I'm talking about the graphic libraries.
Okay.
For example, every time you capture a picture, right? If you have seen Samsung advertisement, they show a sensor and there's a processing that happens and things like that.
Right.
So this is being done by the graphic libraries. So there is GPU, CPUs, and then there is RAM. And everything works together to be able to do this. But then the ideal piece is that you are firing an API for a camera. Our basic thing is to just do that.
Right.
Android takes care of the rest of the things. For example, initiating that particular driver, initiating the particular framework, what app and things like that is ideally taken care by the Android itself. So if I'm a developer wanting to call a camera API, all I have to do is just com.camera. whatever the API.
Right.
So everything is ideally taken care by the camera, unless you want to build extra capabilities. For example, if you have looked at, there is time lapse and slow motion, things like that, right? These are basically a combination of the software, which is the app itself, and then there is hardware also that comes in. So these are some extra capabilities that people can build on top of that. But all we do is to call that particular framework, and everything else is taken care by the Android itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? So I'm gonna go ahead. Okay. So so you guys, if you are testing an Android app, right? So there are few things that are very important for you guys to stay connected with. So one is basically your ADB. So if you guys know of ADB, it's Android Debug Bridge that is provided default by. It is not provided by default, but then you have to install it if you're using a Windows system. So you can just download this particular SDK platform. So now Google has made it easier. So you just download a 17 MB file or 15 MB file just to get the platform tools, which means you also have to set up your environment variables as a ADB for it to capture. The basic thing is to have Java installed in your Windows. So if you're using Mac, so you have to define your brew file where you have to upload the ADB path for you to get started. But as simple very simple thing is to just open the ADB file directly from the platform tools so that you get this. So what ADB does is to give you a connection between the device, which is what you see here. This is my device. So in order for this to work, we need to have ADB. So if the ADB is there, so you can control most of your Android through the ADB itself. So one of the things that I can also show you guys is that if you see ADB devices, so what happens is it will list what device that I've connected. And then if you do ADB logs, so you can see all the logs that are running. So these are real time. So whatever I'm doing here is being captured right now. So that is something that you can use. The reason why you have to keep all of this ready is the fact that when we are starting off with testing, we need to make sure that we are getting enough evidence for developers to debug. Without logs, it's impossible for them to look into what exactly is happening with the application. What are the different things that are running in the background and things like that. So the reason why you have to capture, and here is a tip. So when you want to not run this on your command line directly, so all you can do is that you can see adb logcat logs, and then you redirect it to some logs dot. If you're saying 19th March 337 dot txt. So if you do that, what happens? It will directly write it in a text file instead of pushing everything on the command line itself. So this is a small trick that you can use instead of, since it's very hard to copy paste from the directly from the command line and things like that. Instead, you can use this text file to save all the logs, and whenever you want to report it, you can just copy paste the file to your for Jira or probably over an email or something like that, and then give them the logcat logs. So there's a lot more things that you can do with the ADB logcat. So which is, if you do ADB help, so it will give you what are the things that you can do with the ADB. So you can install package and you can uninstall package and things like that. So that's what it is. So this is one tool that you need to set up. If you have not set up, I suggest you guys to set up if you guys have time right now. But I'll also show you some other things that you can. There's some other tools that you can use to be able to also monitor the application. So this is one. And the second thing is the Charles proxy. If you guys have heard of Charles proxy, I'm pretty sure you guys are using it. So what you need to do here is to connect your Charles proxy with the device. Do you guys know how do you guys connect Charles proxy to the mobile? Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you guys how you can set the Charles proxy. So whenever you go to the settings, so both your system and the laptop and your Charles proxy and also the mobile, everything has to be connected at the same network. So once you have that in place, so you can go to the network, you can go to Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi that you have connected, and then you go to modify network. So one thing that you can see here is the show advanced option. So when you do this, something called proxy settings. When you go to manual, so you can see the proxy host name and the proxy port. This is ideally given by the Charles proxy. So if you go here and go to local IP address, so this is the IP address that I've used in my device. So if you see here, this is the same IP address that I've used in my device. So what happens is every call that happens in my phone is being routed through the Charles proxy that I've printed in my laptop. So what this also means is that whatever happens in the phone, if you're testing a specific application, so you want to see what are the API calls that are being done. Are you finding some 500s and 400s and things like that? You can monitor that. So how do you set up? So you can take this, you can enter your IP address, you can put your port. Port is something that you can set from the Charles proxy as well. It will be usually 8888. So it will directly redirect everything to the Charles proxy. Now, just to give you an example of how it works, so you can clean this. And then I can quickly show you what are the things that are happening. So I'm opening the website. So you can see here that there is a call that has happened. And what was the status, the response code, what was the URL, what is the body, how much time it has taken for the DNS to respond, how much time it has taken for the connection to finish, what was the speed, and what was the size of the response, what was the response size in respect to time. So you can get all of this detail while you are testing your application. So this is to do with your Android phones. This also can be done with your iOS as well, so there's no difference. But then you can set up your IP address, then it will connect directly. So you get a lot more details, the summary of how much time it has taken. Just like how you have a developer options in Chrome, you need a similar developer option for Android apps, and that's what Jalji is all about, right? So and since it is free, so I have to restart it every time. So sorry for that. But then yeah, so these are some tools that you can use to be able to monitor your uh, app testing. So if you are testing an application, keep all of this ready to be able to say you have enough evidence for you to know what exactly is happening with your API calls, with your ADB logs and things like that. So that is one thing. Now it's important for us to also know what is that is there as part of our phone. So this is my phone. My phone is an LG phone, which has got about Snapdragon 835, 2.2 GHz Qualcomm processor. It has got 3 GB or 4 GB of RAM, storage of 128 GB. There is no external storage. There's only internal storage. And then it has got DDR2 RAM, and then some of the things. So I want to get more details about the device. So this will give me an understanding of what is the device that I'm testing on. So if you go to Play Store, there is something called Device Info Hardware. So this is an app that you can use. So when you open this, there is a lot more data that you can get with respect to your phone, of what is the screen resolution that I'm in, what is the platform, which Android version I am in, whether I have, who actually developed your sensors, and then what are the Wi-Fi and the sound and the RAM, everything, what is the storage, and then which Snapdragon processors, what are the processors that you have, which technology it is, and things like that, which GPU that do we have, who is a vendor of the processor. If you guys know, there are 3 different vendors. One is the Qualcomm Snapdragon series, which is 700, 600, and 800 series. And then there is MediaTek processors, which comes in the low-end devices like Xiaomi and things like that. And then there is also Huawei's, sensors, processors that comes in. So these are the 3 major players that are there in the market right now. So you can either see Snapdragon, or you can either see MediaTek, or you can see also Exynos, which is by Samsung. So there are different processors that exist. Also, if you see, my device kept going off, right? So I just want to keep it up and running all the time. So there's a small app called Caffeinate. So you can just click on this. I'm just going to keep it 15 minutes. So this will never let my device sleep till that 15 minutes is over. This is a small app that you can use to keep your testing up and running. You don't want to unlock it every time, things like that, right? So then we have the system, so which tells you which Java VMs it is in. So I was talking about Java runtime, right? So we are in 2.1.2. So, and then which build and what are the other details? What is the resolution? What is the density? We spoke about HTTPI, HDPI, XHDPI, and things like that. So my density is about 420. I can also increase this as part of the resolution. When was the uptime? So you can also see this. I restarted 5 hours before, so that's the reason you see that the uptime is 0. So you can install it to see how long since you have not restarted the phone. It is important that we restart the phone to get maximum data out of it. Then we have the memory. So there are RAM and there's internal storage. You can see that as well. How much RAM is free, how much is being used. What is the RAM type. So you can also see the camera details. So there's a lot more details in terms of what the camera does and how it is. What kind of color filter, what is the orientation, what are the different things that is at part of the camera. So you can see there's a camera to API. So this is what the developers have to call to be able to get the camera up and running. So there are 2 different cameras. So you can see the front, there's 0 back, and there is 2 back. So I have two cameras in the back, one camera is in the front. Uh, one camera in the front. So you can see what is the resolution of each one of them. Um, and what is the aperture. I think Jens can give a lot of idea on what aperture is and things like that. So there's 1.6 and there's 2.2 and 1.9. These are different camera, resolutions and the data about the camera itself. And then we have the battery. You can see what is the health of the battery and what is the status, what is the power, which technology it is, and then voltage and whatever other things that are there. And you can also see the thermal. So these are the sensors and different temperature of each sensors. And then you can also see what are the different sensors that I have. I have accelerometer, light, proximity, magnetometer, gyroscope, and then barometer. So if you guys want to know each one of them, these are, for example, there is step counter, right? The step counter works using the accelerometer. And you have the auto brightness, for example, it uses the light sensor to auto brightness, increase or decrease brightness of the proximity. Is basically when you take the phone, when you pick up a phone and take it next to your ear, the screen goes off. So it uses proximity sensor. And then gyroscope, it checks what is the orientation of the phone and things like that. Then the magnetometer checks what is the elevation that you are in and things like that. So there are different sensors that you can use to be able to get started off, and you can see which are the sensors. These are very interesting for us to know what are the things that are packed in a small phone like this. And then there are different applications. I have about a huge number of applications, about 230 apps installed. So I keep exploring a lot of apps that's there. And then the partitions, you can see what are the read-write partitions with respect to the operating system and also the storage. So there are two different storage. There is internal storage where most of the apps gets to write, and then there is a system storage which you cannot write because that is purely taken care by the system with the Android system itself. That's only read only. There is no write. So you can see there is something called read write here. There is read only here. These are the main two different types of storage that exist. And then what is my Wi-Fi details, which is what is the frequency, the signal, and things like that is part of my Android. And the input, what are the different hardware input that I have? I have a charging, I have a headphone jack, I have a SIM card, I have different keys. So these are different input that I have as part of it. And then codec, these are how you read and write the videos, flash memory, the images, and everything. So there are different codecs that we use to be able to use the audio, video, images, and things like that. And then we have the USB. So right now I've not connected anything, so it says there's no USB data form. So if you see here, this is what a mobile has. So these are the components that are working together to be able to give you something like the Wi-Fi to Bluetooth to the software and everything to be able to run a specific application and give you the data. So this is one app. So all this that we have to do is very initial stage of our testing. So to understand what is that we are getting into. Are we getting into something very complex? Are we getting into simplicity? We don't know why some apps don't work on specific phones. So if you understand the underlying components of why some apps don't work, is because of the fact that some hardware, some things that don't exist as part of the cheaper phones. The reason why the phones are also cheaper is because they remove some of the hardware that is not required, probably that is not used most, and things like that, right? So this is something that you can use. So this is on the device info. You can use the device info to get an understanding of what is that you are holding, what is the capability that your device has, and things like that. Now, coming back to, there are a lot of apps that you can see here. So there are a lot of apps that you can use to get your device info. And then the one of the things that we also do is that there is there are a lot of things that you can get from your Android device itself. So you can scroll down, you can go to system, and then you can go to about phone. So you get a lot of information about my phone, the network that I'm connected to, and the status of the phone, what is the IMEI number, the hardware info, and things like that. This is as part of the phone. So now jumping to the next one, which is the developer options, which we will test. We will, while testing, I'll walk you through the different set of things that you can do to be able to test using the developer options. So how do we actually enable the developer options? So you can go to the software info, and there is something called the build number. So you can click on this. It says no need, you are already a developer. So I am already a developer because I've already enabled the developer option. So you can also enable this. Developer options varies from a device to device. It varies from app version of Androids, different manufacturers as well. So not everybody can have a same set of developer options, but some of them have been there since very long time during the process, right? So that's something that you can enable. So you can go ahead and start. You can enable the developer options right now. Um, so now that we have all of this in place, we are going to start testing the application. So we have this APK that I've given. It's KBV 4.0.4.3.0. This is Khata Book application that we have got from the team. You can go ahead and install this. Even before installing, I just want you guys to observe certain things of what exactly is happening with the application. So actually, I've installed Khata Book here. Going to show you guys. So this book, I'll go app info. So reason why we hate Android phones is how slow it is. So I'm going to uninstall the application. So yeah, so now that I don't have the Khata book, I'm going to install the Khata book application. So I'm going to say adb install, take the APK from here. I hope it's 2.0. The way to install it is to get info of this. For example, in Windows, there is properties. So you can get the properties, you can take this file, you can take this particular location, paste it, slash, with the extension name, and then you just press enter. So now the Khata book is in progress of the installation. So it says, okay, Play Store hasn't seen this app before. Protect yourself, citizen. Okay, I say don't send, so it's okay, I have it. So this will also enable you to get the application quickly installed. You don't have to go search in the file browser, blah, blah, blah. It is very difficult for us to do so. This is the easier way to install any application, any APK in the process. So now I have installed the application. So I just want to see how, what has happened during the installation, right? So now here I can see how big the application is, right? 17.5 MB. This is the size of the application. But if you see here, so it says that 34.34 MB. So what happened here is the fact that .apk, so the full form of APK is application package. So .apk is just like a zip file. So everything is compressed and kept it as an APK. The moment we install it, it distributes all the files, just like how we compress a 100 MB file, it becomes 75 MB. And then when we extract it, it becomes 100 MB. The similar way we have the APK also working in the phones. So it creates a folder, it pushes the necessary folders in a specific format in the storage so that the app can get started, the app can start working, right? So that's the reason why you see there is always a surge of the storage post installation, is because it is extracting the file and then installing the application on the phone. So coming back to the different things that Android does is, so you have the storage which talks about how much data is there, how much cache is there, what is the total, and things like that, which version of the application is. There's something called clear cache, so you can actually clear cache, and then you can also clear the data. Clear data means it removes everything. It basically makes it look like a new app. So don't try this for any of your apps like WhatsApp or something like that. You will not get any data. And then what you can also do is to check the permissions. So you can see all this permission that Khata book is requesting for. It is requesting for camera, it is requesting for contacts, it is requesting for phone, it is requesting for storage. So there are different permissions that are there as part of the apps. So it requires camera because of the fact that it captures some document or probably the receipts as part of the application. Then it requires contacts to send the invites or possibly the alerts for people who have taken money from, or you're planning to give it, and things like that. So just to give you guys a idea of what Khata book is, basically like a ledger for small and medium shops. The fact that if you're in a business and then you give some goods to someone and they say, hey, I'll pay you later once I make a sale, right? So what happens is they write it in a notebook, says, this person has to give me about 50 rupees. He owes me 50 bucks. Then he forgets. So you go back and ask them, you call them and things like that. What Khata book does is to have an entry as part of the Khata book says this person have to give me 50 bucks. And then you can give him a reminder of saying, hey, you owe me 50 bucks. So why don't you make the payment? Why don't you make the payment? And things like that. Or he gives you 100 rupees and you want to give him back 50 bucks. So all this is managed by Khata book. So you don't have to have that small diary that we carry around on a day-to-day business. So that's what the Khata book does. So which means it requires camera, it requires contacts to send a SMS, it requires phone. This is very interesting because there are two things with respect to the phones. Is the fact that it also includes the messaging, it also includes the phone. So you don't need separate permission for messages. It's the phone that you're requesting message, permission for. And then you also have the storage. Storage is, I want to save something. Every time you capture a picture, it makes a small file in the local storage and then continues and adds it to the particular ledger. So these are the different permissions that Khata book is asking. Similarly, if you are testing in your organization, you're looking at getting Khata book's permissions. So one thing that you would ask is, why are we asking these permissions? Why are we asking these permissions? Why are we asking this permission? Just to give you an idea, I'll show you some of the other apps that request permissions for. So I'll go to Twitter, for example, and it takes so much time. So if you go to the permissions here, so it asks for camera, it asks for contacts, microphone, phone, storage, and my location. If you guys ask me why they ask for location, it's the fact that whenever we tweet, it says that it's from Bangalore, India. And then so I didn't give phone permissions because recently Twitter launched something to validate your phone number through an OTP, which I didn't want to do. So I've disabled it. So people can't read my OTP automatically. And then the microphone is because we record videos through, Twitter. And then the context is because it says that these are the people that exist. So we ideally don't need context at all. You can disable it. And then the camera. So these are the basic permissions. There are Facebook, which asks for your entire family history of permissions. So that's how Facebook is. So let me go to the Khata book app. So these are the different permissions that it is asking. And what is the battery? It also gives you the battery usage of how much it has used while you are active, how much was being used in the background, how much out of total is being used. So my phone has a battery capacity of 3300 mAh. So it tells you how much of it is being used. Right now it is charging, so it doesn't require any kind of battery that is being used. And then you can also, one of the tests that you can also do is the battery restrictions. This is ideally there in the Xiaomi phones and things like that. It's the fact that the Khata book, if I restrict this particular app to not run in the background, it will stop this app from waking up at any point of time during the day unless you launch it. So you can try this in some of your applications. For example, WhatsApp and restrict. WhatsApp has a it can bypass because it does a push notification. But then there are certain apps where you can disable, uh, uh, enable this background restrictions. So you don't get notifications, you don't get emails, or you don't get anything until unless you open the application. So there might be 10 different emails that you would have got, but then when you open, you see all the notifications kicking at the same time. So that's something with respect to the background restrictions. So this is something that you can use while you're testing. This simulates how a battery low situation is. So you don't have to put your battery under 15% and wait for it to become 15% and do things like that. Instead, you can use this. It simulates how the battery low percentage is. Okay. So then we have the default options, which is right now it's not supported, things like that. So this is with respect to the Kata book. So please go ahead and install the application in your phone. I know this is, if we were hands-on in front of each other, we would have done this more, like a workshop where we don't have to worry about looking at installation. Wait for this. Right now, I don't know whether how many people are trying it out, but then go ahead and install the application. We can go through some of the things. Somebody is pinging on Slack. So quit the Slack. Okay, so we go to Kata book. So this is the Kata book. So now I've just launched the application. Pardon me. I was just thinking what. So you guys have any questions so far? Anybody have any questions? Okay, great. So let's jump into. I'm going to clear all the notifications so it doesn't bother me. So we just launched the application. It asks, there is this selection and things like that. But what you can do is, so let us jump quickly into the developer settings and see what are the options that we have. Before developer settings itself, we have something called display, which all of you guys have. So there are two things in displays. So one is the display size. It tells you how good or bad the display size has to be. Like it has to be big, so which is this big, or which actually zooms in everything. If you see, you can see most of the things clearly, or you can bring it down to 0. So this is the smallest display size. So most of the time I've seen testers, when they are testing by default. They don't know what is their environment. For example, what is your display size? What is your resolution that you're testing on? What is the font size? I can also show you the font size. So there's brightness and there's timeout, font. So you can see different font sizes. So I can make it larger, make it smaller. Everything impacts the application. So the reason why most of the people on the users, complaining, I'm not able to click it here, I'm not able to see this, it's happening only in my phone and things like that, is because of the basics that each one of our phones are defined with the different settings. So the reason why we see the font or the display size or everything as different. So you can also see different font size. There are phones that comes with different fonts, and there are font size, and you can make it bold. There are a lot of options that you can try it out. So for now, let me open this full. So I'm keeping it full font size. I'm also keeping the display size to bigger. And then I'm going to launch Kata book, for example. Now you can see that it has adopted very nicely, where we can see all the languages coming in, and then the scroll has been enabled, because previously there was no scroll. My display size was much more smaller than what it is. And then to take it to the next level, one of the things that you can also do is go to settings, go to developer options, and then there is something called smallest width. What this simulates is the fact that how much pixel or how much display density you want to keep. So let me keep it at 420, for example, or 430, for example. So you can see how small it becomes. So you are not able to see yourself how small it is. Now you can see how the app responds to it when you launch the application. So it relaunched the application, and then if you can see, all of them came in the same place. So this is something that you can test. This is something that you can test at the very initial stage, given the fact that we don't I want to make it full screen so everybody can see it. Full screen mode. Okay, not a problem. It's fine. Okay, so this is something that you guys can do as part of the display itself. So I um, made it very smallest. And there is one more thing that I've enabled. The reason why everything is, slowing is because of the fact that there is something called don't keep activities. The fact that don't keep activities simulates how an app is being killed by Android. So there is something called activity lifecycle. There is an on start, on pause, on resume, and then there is stop. So what this does is the fact that every time you launch an application, it is an on start state, and then it goes on. Basically, you are using the application, and then you go on the background. Right now, the particular settings page is on the pause state because of the fact that it is not in the foreground, it is gone in the background. So this is on pause state, and then what I'm doing is I'm launching it again. This is on resume state, so which means I am coming back to the same place where I had left in the previous screen. What this does is to simulate how the app kills. So let's say I open like plenty of applications here that you can see. These are the number of applications. So in Android, there is something like the RAM management, and then there is also app stacking. The ones which comes on top gets the highest priority, which means whatever the RAM that you want to use, whatever the CPU that you want to use, whatever the GPU that you want to use, you will get all the access to that. Meanwhile, the Android takes care of doing the GCs and things like that. That's something that will happen. Also, the fact that if you're, for example, if you're playing PUBG, I hope many people can connect to it. If you see, every time you come out of PUBG and launch any other application, it takes some amount of time because of the fact that Android has given so much RAM, CPU, and everything to PUBG that you don't have any more space for any other apps to run in the background. And the reason why you go on the background, it takes some time for PUBG to get killed and then launch the rest of the application. So this is something that you can do. This simulates something very, very close. Now I switch off the don't keep activities and then go back to the same place. It does not restart. So I can go here. So see, if you see, there is no the blank screen. There is only the place that I have left. So the only difference is if I keep don't keep any activities, and if I go to Khata Book, it will relaunch it. If I go to developer settings, it relaunches it. So you can see visible difference on the app while you're testing if you enable this. And one of the things that you can also do is customize how much process you need to run. If I run at most 2 processes, which means the last 2 apps will have the necessary bandwidth to run, but the rest of the apps goes off. So I'll keep it standard limit. I disable the don't keep activities, and then go back to Khata Book. Now it will not kill. Rather, it will stay back in the same place that you said, right? So this is one thing that you can try it out as part of the developer settings, which is the display. Second thing is the don't keep activities. And if we are looking at finding crashes, I think one of the things that came to me is how do we find crashes? Is you have to enable this don't keep activities, try to switch between the applications and try to launch different applications. For example, the LinkedIn, it's very memory intensive application, and then go to again launch the application and things like that. This will basically simulate the stage where you don't have enough memory, you just need to quickly get started off with and things like that. So this is on the don't keep activities enabled. Any questions here so far? Okay, great. this is on the developer settings. This is one such option that you can try it out during the launch. It actually gives you a lot of idea of what is happening with the application during the launch. This is a very crucial test when it comes to Android. So I'm going to go ahead and say English, and app is stuck. Okay. So if you see, the app actually hung for a second. I was trying to click on English and then I tried to click somewhere else, and it ended up choosing Telugu or something like that, right? So that is something. So this is one observation that I came across. Now what you can do is we can try to simulate this by enabling the don't keep activities and then setting the standard limit and go back, kill the application and then launch it once again. Keep it in language settings and then switch between the application. I keep switching between the application. See, it doesn't work. So we just came across an observation. Sure, Deepa, we'll wrap it up quickly. Okay. Now that we have enabled this, we came across something very strange, which is when we launched the application, it took some time. Now, one thing that you can also do is it requires the API call. Just now, my Charles actually closed. Now, if I try to make a contact, sure, Deepa, that's also can be done. Depends on the people here, how they respond. If they want to continue, we can continue. If they don't want to continue, we can stop it. Okay. So one thing that you have with Charles is the fact that okay, sure, definitely we can do that. So so there is an option in Charles or Fiddler, so you can use either of this. So you can go to there's something called throttling. Some throttle settings. So you can go here. What you can do is you can simulate a 56 kbps modem, probably 512 kbps or 256 kbps modem. So this basically makes it people can raise hands instead of messaging if it's only Deepa. Okay, great. We'll continue. Okay. So we have bandwidth options which you can set of seeing how much bandwidth you want to keep it. Let me keep it at 10 KB upload and 10 KB download. The maximum latency. Let me keep the stability to be 20% and the reliability to be 50%. So these are all your data set, your test data on how you can test your application while you are monitoring. You want to simulate the very corner cases while you're testing. Is using this, you can throttle and then you can say, okay, now I'm going to start using Khata book. And then there is an option that comes that it says verify Khata book using my Truecaller. If I don't have it installed, if I have the Truecaller not installed, will be a different thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off my Wi-Fi and also my network, and I'm going to say continue. It says logging you in, no internet connection, try again. Okay, great. So now I'm going to enable my network. I'm going to say start Khata book, and then continue. Then I'm going to turn off. So it has logged in successfully. It's logged in successfully, even with that particular throttling, which is a good sign of what exactly is happening with respect to the throttling. So I've enabled it. Now I'm going to disable the throttling and continue. So what you can also see here is you can see something called Khata book. We get Khata book. I'm going to do something here. It's not making any calls. I'm going to say we gave 300 rupees. And then you can see the Khata book API here. So you can see all the, what is the URL of the Khata book, what is the status, what is the response code, and things like that. And then all the certificates that you have, what are the servers. They have their own server, which is Khata book. You can also see they have an Amazon server that you are using. And then you can see which certificate they are using and what was the connection status. Sure, we can do that. So, and then you can also see the request and the response time and all the Khata book requests that are happening here, right? So this is something you can monitor all the time to be able to say what is happening with Khata book in terms of the API calls that are you want to monitor and things like that. So if you say add allow customers, allow access to Khata book, I say not now. So I'm going to say my name is Abilash. I'm going to add my own phone number. I'm going to say now that I've entered something here, I have enabled don't keep activities, which means what is the expectation here is when I go back to the application, I expect my phone number, my name to exist there. I don't want it to be killed or I don't want it to be removed. This is where the experience kick in. I'm expecting the activity to stay alive, even with that particular restrictions of don't keep activity enabled. If they are, if the activities is getting disabled, is the fact that they are not able to handle the activities the way it needs to be handled. Usually, even when you have all this restriction and go on the background, you are expecting it to stay online is the fact that the activity is on pause state and but not on stop state. So there's always on stop state which kicks in later point of time. Now I'm going to start a couple of other applications just to keep all the try to kill the application in the background. I'm going to start different applications. Um, probably some Google Earth, which is a very high intensive, graphic intensive application. The reason why I'm doing this is to put as much pressure on the application of um, on Khata book. So let me go back to Khata book now. I'm expecting the same to be there. Although you can see here that it exists when I open it, on it resumes the application or kills this particular activity. Hopefully, voila. So which means we entered the name, we entered the phone number. Because it couldn't handle the activity, it removed whatever I've entered. For example, if you're a user and then you are sitting next to your customer, you're entering your name and the number, but then something else came up and then you're going back to your work. When you come back to your application, you expect the phone number because you don't remember that person's phone number or probably the new customer was coming. You actually lost the data of your users that you have entered and kept. This is one such scenario where we say that all these developer options are enabling us to understand what exactly is happening, how the app behaves, and the corner cases that your users are reporting that I'm not able to log in. If I enter something, it fails. It does ABCs. The fact that people are trying to enter and then the app on the background because of the phones. So if you also, to give you a context, is the fact that Khata book is being used by small shops and people in the market, people in very with a low end phone, which means you're not expecting the app to run with too much room to spare in terms of the RAM and the storage and things like that, which means the same thing that you are expecting to say your customer name and everything has to exist. It's the fact that what will happen to your users and they start complaining that this is what is happening, right? Although you can see here when I entered my name, the mobile number automatically populated is because this particular activity got killed, but then the particular frame, which is the mobile number, did not vanish. They stored, but they couldn't handle this particular activity when it came back to the specific idea of what exactly the don't keep activity is doing to it, right? So I'm gonna go say save. Right now it's stuck. So there is a bug. Is the fact that for Khata book there is no mobile number is entered so far. It is still considering it as mobile number being empty. That's the reason the save is not enabled after I clicked it. Now if I go and put 4, you can see that the save enabled. We came across two different issues with this particular developer option enabled at this particular screen itself, right? So this is how the apps behave. Most of the apps behave this way with such pressure that's being put on the application. Now I'm going to go save. Should probably I have to enter the entire number. Wow. It is not allowing me to save whatsoever. Is the fact that probably I'm entering my own phone number, but which I've already done in the past. So if you see, this is my number, and then I've already cleared. Oh, yeah, this is one. So I've already entered my number here, the previous number. I am not sure how the functionality is. This is something that we need to check with the developers of how it is to be done. For example, when I go add a customer, I don't allow, then I enter the customer's name with the same number. The previous time it didn't enable because it said it's an invalid number. Now I'm going to say, I think it created another account. So there was clearly a bug that we found during this particular instance of going back with the don't keep activities enabled and trying to enter the number and not giving permissions. Even now I have not given permission to for anybody to add a customer. So I'm not given this permission. So every time I try to enter, it takes me back to the same number that I've done. So I'm going to, for a change, I'm going to enter a different number, 7 for example, and I've given the same name. I hopefully also considered that as well as part of the test data. So if you see here, this is one such thing that happened with developer options enabled. So now what we are doing is to test the functionality of the application. So there are two different metrics that I took. One is the name, which is the same name as the previous one, but I changed the number, which is only the last number. And I'm going to save and see whether the name conflicts or probably have the same name in the entries. So I'm going to save. Now it's considered as new entry because if you see the new number is enabled. Now I'm going to go back and refresh. So there are two entries which says 7 seconds ago and then 2 minutes ago. So this is without a phone number. Yes. I'm not sure how it works without the phone number, and this is with the phone number. And all the three names are Abilash, so which means I use the same name, so there's no conflict with the names. Now, one of the experiences, if I have customers with similar names, how do you manage it here? Who am I referring to? What am I referring to? Is it the way the functionality is defined? Is it the way that particular instance of the name is defined? If I search for Abilash, I hope all the names will come, and I don't know whom should I contact for what, right? And things like that. Now, in the same page, there are a lot of buttons we can see here. There's add customers, there's a floating bar, and there is more, and there is an icon here. There are different switch. So what I'm also going to do is to go to the developer options, probably the displays. I'm going to go to the display. I'm going to go to display size. I'm going to increase the size. I'm going to go back. Then the font, increase the font as well. I'm going to say apply. So this is how big the font is right now. Then I'm going to go back to Khata book to see how the app responds to it. Wow, look at that. So we just found some things like there's overlap if you have a good number. There are searches, the sort, and things like that. If you see the ad customer is so big that there are people Um, the entire screen is covered. So, and then you can also see the edit button and things like that. So this is how the app responds to given the different settings that we enable at different point of time. I'm also going to search. If you see the search here, you clearly see the S has gone out of this particular layout. Now I'm going to show you how you can actually report this bug. So what you can do is you can go back to the developer options. I'm going to go to system, I'm going to go to developer options, and then you can see something called show layout bounds. It basically shows all the margin and what is the space available for each and every element. Now I go back to Khata book. If I open this, you can see that when I search, let the streaming data. Okay, you can see that the search has this particular width and the height of for this particular space. But then the text and the layout, there is a small thin line that you can see. That's how big the layout is, right?